The Prime Minister today weighed in on a range of issues that involve transgender women and which are often fraught and cause much unhappiness. He conceded that his view that they should not compete in female-only sport was controversial. And Boris Johnson also talked about the issue of so-called safe spaces, such as in hospitals, prisons or changing rooms, opining that there should be spaces dedicated to women, his words. But it's the government's decision not to include trans in its decision to ban conversion therapies which has made the latest headlines and has caused disquiet among his own MPs, notably Jamie Wallace, Britain's first openly trans Tory MP, who says he's bitterly disappointed at the UK government's decision to exclude gender identity from the ban on conversion therapy.
Trans rights are human rights! Trans rights are human rights!
Intersectional diversity debates can seem bewildering to newcomers and non-frequenters of social media. At the heart of this one is the debate over whether a person is defined by gender, which can be fluid, or biological sex, which is determined by your chromosomes.
So a woman can have a penis?
Nick, I'm not... I don't think we can conduct this debate with...
Sorry, have I offended you in something?
No, it's just...
Answering that question, yes or no, risks upsetting someone. Either the influential and popular LGBT plus community if the answer is no, or a significant number of feminists if the answer is yes. But some politicians still go there.
Can a woman have a penis?
Men have penises, women have vaginas. Here ends my biology lesson.
The press and the Conservative Party have recently started speaking more loudly about a raft of trans issues.
I don't think that biological males should be competing in female sporting events, and maybe that's a controversial thing to say, but it just seems to me to be sensible. And I also happen to think that women should have spaces which are, whether it's in hospitals or prisons or change rooms or wherever, which are dedicated to women.
Last week, the government tried to scrap Theresa May's pledge to ban anti-LGBT so-called conversion therapy, treatments claiming to change gender and sexual orientation. Following an outcry, they quickly backtracked, except for the trans element. Trans conversion therapy will not be made illegal.
We will have a ban on gay conversion therapy, which to me is utterly abhorrent. But there are complexities and sensitivities when you move from the area of sexuality to the question of gender.
In response, more than 100 groups pulled out of a landmark global LGBT conference planned for this summer, hosted by the UK government. The conference has now been cancelled. Well, joining me now is trans activist and author Ivy DeLuca and trans journalist Debbie Hayton. Debbie, coming to you first, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Has Boris Johnson made the right call not including trans conversion therapy in the ban?
Well, I think he has, and I think the issue is children and the unintended consequences of any ban on the talking therapies which children need. We've seen a remarkable increase in the number of children who are identifying as transgender over the last 10 years. It's something like 4,000% in terms of girls. So something is going on here. And those children need the support of a therapist. And if a child goes to a therapist and is convinced that they're trans and has been told that they're trans, been led to believe that they're trans, the danger of banning conversion therapy is the problem that it may have the unintended consequences of banning normal, ethical, exploratory therapy with children, especially children who are convinced that they're trans.
But the government has said that there is no question of actually any kind of prosecutions and that you have to be able to have open and free conversations, and that's not what this is about. That is not going to be the unintended consequence.
Well, it's difficult for a therapist who is presented with this law worried about what may happen down the line. If one of their patients now comes back and then claims that this therapist, what was actually normal exploratory therapy, a patient comes back in the future and says that this was something different, it puts those therapists in a very difficult position. And we're seeing a chilling impact on therapy in other jurisdictions where laws like this have already been passed.
Is this not just an example of, as it were, othering trans men and women? The fact that Boris Johnson has not moved on this?
Well, I'm not sure about othering. I am a trans woman, so this is me. I'm not convinced actually about the evidence base which is driving this need for this new legislation. We have to remember that abusive and harmful practices are already illegal. You know, it's not you can't engage in abusive practices. The government has gone to their own LGBT survey of 3 years ago for evidence, and the evidence there was very weak as to how much conversion therapy is actually happening. It's somewhere in the low number of percentage which was actually reported, and this was in a self-reported study. No idea, there was no record of when this had happened or even where it had happened, whether it was overseas or at home. So all of a sudden this move to ban conversion therapy has happened. We need to be asking where this actual drive has come from.
But you know, conversion therapy is a very harmful practice. You know, isn't it just full stop a very harmful practice?
Well, I think you've used both words there, Kirsty, which is interesting. We're talking about conversion practices and conversion therapy. If we were looking at conversion practices, we then have a better view of what's happening. We're looking at harmful practices, often in families and in churches, according to the LGBT survey. But the legislation, the drafting of the legislation seems to be conversion therapy. So it's conflating these conversion practices with exploratory therapy.
Debbie Hayton, I wonder, you've seen the demonstrations, the big conferences cancelled. Would you accept that your view is not the mainstream view of the trans community, and that actually, do you understand why trans people feel very unhappy about this?
Well, it's when we appear to have been left out. But I'm a teacher. I happen to be trans, but I'm a teacher. I work with children, and I care about children, and I worry greatly about the unintended consequences of this possible legislation on children, young people who need our support.
Thank you very much indeed. And just turning to Ivy DeLuca, what do you make of that, and what do you make of the fact that Boris Johnson is not including trans conversion therapy in the ban?
I think it's ludicrous to not include trans and non-binary people within the ban. I think this conversation about the dangers of conversion therapy, of not providing conversion therapy and all that. At the end of the day, this is a form of abuse, and to talk about therapy and talk about conversion therapy is two completely different things.
Of course, the government has not said that it's not going to do it. It says not at the moment, and it has said that it is complex and sensitive. And when people have gender dysphoria and want to transition, how important is it that they do have access to all kinds of counselling?
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, it's not complex and it's not complicated. The information is out there. There are services out there that are there to help trans and non-binary people navigate through the healthcare system. And a part of that includes talking therapies. Mm-hmm. And I think that when it comes to talking therapies, it includes discussing their journey and supporting them and giving them the clarity and the understanding to navigate through their own gender journey. Whereas conversion therapy is basically someone saying, we don't like that you're not like us, so we're going to change you to be like us.
But do you recognise that some clinicians feel concerned that what they're doing, what they're saying and the way that they're operating could be misconstrued, and they could find themselves on the wrong side of the law?
Yeah, I can understand that, but at the same time, we need to understand that we're in the current times and we need to change with the times and educate ourselves and understand that trans and non-binary people exist and we're not going to disappear. And this legislation excluding trans and non-binary people is yet another narrative from this government that is basically saying that we don't matter. And I really think that we have to look at this whole situation and not from a lens where transphobia is being fed to all of us. Because at the end of the day, transphobia doesn't come from fear or ignorance. It comes from power and privilege.
But you, I know, are very keen on conversation and you have to take people with you. And I wonder if you think that there's a way in which we can take the toxicity out of the conversations. And there is undoubtedly toxicity.
Yes. I think it's about looking at the whole situation, speaking to the community. A lot of these decisions are being made by people who don't have lived experiences. And I understand that everyone has their own opinions and everything like that. But when your opinions start to inflict mental or physical detriment to an entire community, then it's not on. It's absolutely not on.
Do you think that children should have just more general conversations about all kinds of sexuality than they're having just now? And it would mean then that it wasn't such an uncharted path, and children particularly wouldn't feel, as they often feel, very alone when they have gender dysphoria.
Absolutely. You know, I went through my transition over 17 years ago, but I knew who I was from a very young age in the 90s, but I just didn't know how to articulate who I was. I didn't even know that transgender was even a term. But had I been given that information, I could have really understood who I was, included my parents in it, included a therapist to kind of navigate who I was and everything like that. And it would have made my journey a lot less traumatic. I could have avoided quite a lot of trauma that I dealt with as a child. And I think that having the opinions such as this is very detriment to children. It's just not on, and we need to change. We need to be united in positive change.
So a quick word for Boris Johnson on this, what would you say?
You need to start listening to us because we're listening to you, and don't think that we're going to back down, because there's a lot of people, including myself, who are going to speak up against you, and it may be that you're going to win the battle, but we will win the war.
Thank you both very much indeed.